Iran just made its most strategically significant diplomatic move since this conflict began. Iran's ambassador to China, Abdolreza Rahmani Fazli, posted on social media Sunday that any potential agreement between Iran and the United States must be accompanied by guarantees from great powers, specifically China and Russia, and must be raised in the United Nations Security Council. I want to explain why that single statement changes the architecture of any possible deal completely, and why it means that America, which has been conducting this conflict as a bilateral confrontation with Iran, has been outmaneuvered diplomatically in a way that will be visible to every party at the Beijing summit in 3 days. Let me start with what Iran actually asked for and why the ask is far more sophisticated than the coverage suggests. What Iran actually asked and what it means strategically, Iran's ambassador said specifically any potential agreement must necessarily be accompanied by guarantees from the great powers and raised in the United Nations Security Council. China and Russia are two major and influential powers, and given the position that China holds for Iran and other countries in the Persian Gulf region, China can play an important role. This is not a request for help negotiating. This is a request for a specific legal and institutional architecture for any deal. Raising an agreement at the United Nations Security Council means making it a Security Council resolution, a document that, under Article 25 of the UN Charter, all member states are obligated to implement. A Security Council resolution on the Iran deal cannot be unilaterally withdrawn by the United States. It cannot be voided by a future American administration, the way the JCPOA was voided in 2018. It requires a Security Council vote to modify or remove. China and Russia both hold permanent Security Council veto power. If China and Russia are co-guarantors of a deal and the deal is embedded in a Security Council resolution, the United States cannot exit the agreement without Chinese or Russian consent or without vetoing its own agreement, which would be diplomatically catastrophic. This is the architecture Iran has asked for, not a bilateral agreement between Iran and America, a multilateral framework with great power guarantors and UN Security Council legal standing. America has been conducting this war as a bilateral confrontation, America versus Iran, in which American military and economic power would eventually force Iranian capitulation on American terms. The custodianship terms Trump has been proposing Iran ships its uranium to American custody, pledges not to operate underground facilities, are the terms of a bilateral deal where America holds the leverage. Iran's ambassador just said, we will not accept a bilateral deal. Any deal must have Chinese and Russian guarantors and UN Security Council standing. That is not a request. It is a condition. And it is a condition that, if accepted, transforms the deal from an American victory into a multilateral settlement in which America is one of several powers, not the dominant party. Why Trump called Iran's response totally unacceptable. Trump called Iran's response to the American proposal totally unacceptable. Oil prices immediately rose 3.17% to $104.50 a barrel, the market pricing in the collapse of near-term deal prospects. I want to explain specifically why Iran's response produced that reaction, not because Iran said something outrageous, but because Iran's response, including the ambassador's guarantee demand, directly contradicts the framework that America has been operating within. America's proposal was structured as a bilateral agreement. Iran ships its uranium to American custody. Iran pledges not to operate underground facilities. The United States lifts the blockade. These are bilateral commitments between two sovereign parties, commitments that either party could theoretically exit from unilaterally, the way America exited the JCPOA in 2018. Iran's response said, not good enough. Any deal must have Chinese and Russian guarantors and UN Security Council standing. From America's perspective, this is unacceptable for a specific reason. A Security Council guarantee deal with Chinese and Russian co-guarantors means America cannot apply future unilateral pressure on Iran without Chinese and Russian agreement. The tool that has been America's primary instrument of leverage over Iran, the threat of renewed sanctions, renewed military pressure, renewed economic isolation, becomes constrained by the requirement for Security Council consensus. Uh, America said the response was totally unacceptable because Iran's response was designed to make America's primary leverage instrument, unilateral coercive pressure, permanently more difficult to apply. That is not a negotiating position Iran adopted spontaneously. It is the result of 82 days of watching America exit the JCPOA, impose maximum pressure, and launch a war while negotiations were ongoing. Iran has concluded correctly that any bilateral deal with America is only as durable as America's domestic political will to maintain it, which, as the JCPOA demonstrated, is not durable at all. What the Beijing summit means 3 days away. The Beijing summit is 3 days away. Trump meets Xi Jinping on May 14th and 15th, and Iran's request for Chinese and Russian guarantors, combined with the ambassador's statement that China can play an important role, tells you specifically what Iran expects to get from that summit. Iran wants China to formally commit to being a guarantor of any agreement. That commitment, China publicly and legally guaranteeing Iran's compliance with a deal and America's compliance with its obligations, gives Iran what the JCPOA lacked: a mechanism through which American unilateral exit would have diplomatic and legal consequences involving a great power that America cannot simply ignore. Xi Jinping knows this. He will arrive at the Beijing summit having just heard Iran's ambassador publicly name China as a desired guarantor. He will have been briefed by Iran on the specific terms Iran wants China to guarantee. He will be in the position of the party whose cooperation both Iran and America need. Iran needs China's guarantee. America needs China to pressure Iran toward a deal, and who therefore has leverage over both simultaneously. This is not a position China sought reluctantly. China has been building toward this position for the entire duration of the conflict. The shadow fleet that kept Iran's oil flowing, the CIPS payment system that processed Iran's oil revenue outside American financial controls, the strategic reserves that insulated Chinese markets from the energy shock. These were not neutral economic decisions. They were the infrastructure of a diplomatic strategy that culminates in China being the indispensable guarantor of a settlement, the party without whose involvement no deal can be durable. America arrived at this situation by conducting the war as a bilateral confrontation with Iran, while China quietly built the position of indispensability. 3 days before the summit, that position is fully established. Iran has named China as the desired guarantor. Russia has reiterated its uranium custodianship offer, and America is arriving in Beijing having called Iran's response totally unacceptable, while oil is at $104.50 and American families are paying 52% more at the gas pump. What Netanyahu's zero aid statement reveals. I want to address something that has been underreported in the context of Iran's guarantor demand. On the same day that Iran's ambassador asked for Chinese and Russian guarantees, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told CBS's 60 Minutes that he wants to reduce American military support from $3.8 billion a year to zero. He said it is time Israel weaned itself from remaining military support. This statement is extraordinary in its context. America has spent $25 billion prosecuting a war that began with a joint American-Israeli operation. America has struck over 11,000 targets in Iran since February 28th. 13 American service members are dead. American families are paying 52% more for gasoline. And the Prime Minister of Israel, the country whose intelligence was described as a decisive factor in America's decision to launch the war, says it is time to wean Israel from remaining American military support. I want to explain what that statement communicates to the Iranian diplomatic team that asked for Chinese and Russian guarantors on the same day. Netanyahu's statement communicates that Israel's relationship with American military support is transitional, that Israel is moving toward strategic independence from the American alliance framework that has characterized the relationship for decades. In the context of the Iran war, this is a signal that Israel's strategic interests and America's strategic interests are not as aligned as the joint operation of February 28th suggested. America is paying the bills. Netanyahu is signaling he intends to stop needing them for Iran's diplomatic calculation. This is useful information. If Israel is moving toward independence from American military support, the argument that American concessions on the nuclear question are driven by Israeli pressure rather than genuine American strategic interests becomes easier to make in the Security Council context. Iran is demanding Operation Eternal Darkness, what the Lebanon dimension means for any deal Israel launched Operation Eternal Darkness this week, the largest attack since the start of the war on Hezbollah's command and control centers in southern Lebanon, Beirut, and the Bekaa Valley. At least 357 people were killed. At least 1,200 others were injured. In Beirut alone, at least 92 people were killed. Iran has stated clearly that it will not agree to any deal that does not include a halt to Israel's fight with Hezbollah in Lebanon. That condition, Lebanon must be part of any settlement, is the specific element of Iran's position that makes American acceptance most difficult. America cannot commit to stopping Israel's Lebanese campaign without Netanyahu's agreement. And Netanyahu, who speaks with Trump almost daily with what he describes as full coordination and no surprises, has been conducting Operation Eternal Darkness simultaneously with the Iran negotiations. Netanyahu said there is work to be done in Iran because it still retains key nuclear and missile capabilities. The specific overlap, Iran asking for a halt to the Lebanon war as a condition of any deal, Israel expanding the Lebanon war while negotiations are ongoing, is the diplomatic knot that the Beijing summit is being asked to untie. Xi Jinping arriving as the desired guarantor will have a specific interest in whether the Lebanon condition can be addressed. China's relationships with both Iran and with Lebanese political actors give it a diplomatic capacity in the Lebanon question that America does not have. What comes next? The 3 days before Beijing, Iran asked for Chinese and Russian guarantors and UN Security Council standing, Trump called the response totally unacceptable. Oil is at Satanelia Pilku Vis. The Beijing summit is in 3 days. In those 3 days, three things will tell you whether a deal is possible before the summit or whether the summit itself is the last diplomatic moment before the conflict enters a new phase. First, whether China responds publicly to Iran's guarantor request. If Beijing's foreign ministry issues a statement accepting or expressing willingness to consider the guarantor role before Trump arrives in Beijing, the deal architecture Iran demanded has been accepted in principle. That statement, if it comes, will be the most important diplomatic development since the one-page memo was reported closed 2 weeks ago. Second, whether Russia reconfirms the uranium custodianship offer in the context of the guarantor framework. Putin reiterated his offer to help move Tehran's fissile material stockpile on Saturday. If Russia frames its custodianship offer explicitly as part of a guaranteed multilateral framework rather than as a bilateral Russian Iranian arrangement, it has accepted Iran's architectural demand and is offering America a mechanism to close the deal within the framework Iran requires. Third, whether oil prices move before the summit ends. A significant drop in Brent crude before May 15th means the deal is being constructed privately, regardless of what either side says publicly. The market will price a settlement before any announcement is made. Iran asked for China and Russia to guarantee the deal. America said totally unacceptable. 3 days until Beijing. And the party that China agrees to guarantee, Iran has already named China as the indispensable power. America has been outmaneuvered. The question is whether the Beijing summit produces a framework that acknowledges that reality, or whether America enters the next phase of this conflict, still insisting on a bilateral deal that Iran will not sign. Watch China's response. Watch the oil price. Watch Beijing.